A shocking story now out of Savannah. 13 men who say they are victims of labor trafficking are seeking justice after a month-long nightmare. Our Shay Schrader joins us in the studio. And Shay, you spoke at length with these men. How did all of this happen?
Yes, Madeline. So this story goes back months and months as more than a dozen Chinese nationals made their way here to the United States after they say they were promised housing, work, and of course, pay for that work. But they say when they didn't get paid, they knew something was wrong. We were able to sit down with several of the folks in this situation. Now, we aren't showing their faces for safety reasons, and as they only speak Mandarin Chinese, we communicated with them through a translator.
He feels sad because he worked hard and then he did not receive what he was promised.
13 men living in a typical Savannah suburb say they've been working 13-hour days, 7 days a week with nothing to show for it. The men say they came to the United States from China because they were promised the American dream.
So what they promised him is that work, of course, $18 per hour. Then they're going to pay for the airline ticket, provide the housing, and also that transport, in and from the house to work. And then they were paying him cash. And he thought that this is a good opportunity, so he came.
When they arrived, they say what they found is a nightmare. After a 45-day journey to get to the United States.
From China to get over here, he went through 9 different countries, got to the United States.
The men say they worked for a month at a warehouse, loading and unloading trucks and separating products. They say they haven't seen a dime.
Yeah, basically they work for free, and then non-stop working. It's possible that they're involved in the human trafficking.
On April 9th, the men contacted the Savannah Police Department because they realized something wasn't right. The report states that the men were working for E-Green Transportation, loading and unloading trucks and separating products, and that the men were collectively owed around $110,000. We reached out to the company last week, but have not heard back. The report also states, they showed me several sheets containing days worked and trucks that they unloaded. All of the workers stated that they haven't been paid, have very little to no food, and rent is due. Days later, on April 12th, another report was filed with SPD, this time referring to the situation as human trafficking. At this point, the men say they had stopped working, so they had no money, and the company was no longer giving them food. So they went to their neighbor for help, explaining their situation through a translation app.
I said to my wife, I go, we got to help them. A friend said to me one day, I was talking in a certain way, and he said, hey, we're all God's children. And now that they're here. So, human to human, you got to help people.
Johnson has been giving them food when possible and rallied other neighbors to do the same. He says he's heard of situations like this, but never thought it would happen here.
To actually have them living right next door and for them to tell the story, I was absolutely blown away.
As we were interviewing the men, their landlord informed them that they have to leave the house in less than a week because they can't pay rent. They don't know where they'll go next.
He feels like this is incorrect, especially in the United States, that it's a country of law, that this thing shouldn't happen.
Department tells WTOC that the case is now being handled by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, but the GBI tells us it's not their case. The men have been in contact with some humanitarian groups for legal help, but they tell us the process could be lengthy and there's no guarantee that they'll ever get their money as they are undocumented. After speaking to the men, we wanted to know just how common this situation is in coastal Georgia, so we sat down with some experts to get that answer. That's coming up on The News at 6.
We continue our coverage of a shocking story out of Savannah tonight.
Earlier today on The News at 5:30, we introduced you to 13 Chinese nationals that say they were trafficked here. They described to us how they traveled through 9 countries before entering the U.S., where they worked 13-hour days at a local warehouse. They reached out for help when after a month they still hadn't been paid.
WTOC's Shay Schrader sat down with experts in labor trafficking to find out how common this situation is. Shay joins us now and brings us what she's learned.
Yes, Dawn, I sat down with Greg Galuli, the Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division in the United States Attorney's Office, and this interview was eye-opening. Deputy Chief Gillooly has been prosecuting labor trafficking cases for the last 15 years and says that labor trafficking is a prevalent problem not just here in Georgia, but across the entire country.
It's a multi-million-dollar business for organized crime.
Gillooly says that victims, like in the case of 13 Chinese nationals currently residing in Savannah, they're often promised a better life, one that traffickers have no intention of providing them.
They often come here with this hope of working and making American wages, and when they get here they realize those jobs don't exist, and they get exploited, and they're in a foreign country, they don't speak the language.
It can feel like a hopeless situation. Some labor trafficking victims enter the country legally while others do not. The fear of what could happen to them if they contact law enforcement, Gillooly says, will often stop them from seeking help, which can make bringing the traffickers to justice a challenge.
You have to break that barrier of distrust. You have to get these victims to trust you, to tell you their story. And once you break that barrier and you tell them that you're not the one in trouble, we're here to help, then they start to talk. And when they start to talk, and others learn that they're getting help instead of getting punished, others start coming forward.
And when they do, Gillooly says that the case can quickly grow into a monster. He pointed towards one case that's still being prosecuted right now. Javier Mendoza, a Mexican national that was in the United States illegally, is currently serving a 30-year federal prison sentence for trafficking more than 500 people from Central America to southern Georgia to work on farms. He also threatened their families and forced them to work in substandard conditions for little or no pay. Mendoza also selected one woman from that group and began sex trafficking her as well. She managed to escape, but after that, Mendoza kidnapped her and was about to murder her in Jessup before law enforcement arrived.
And they ended up going in and rescuing her. But she was about to be sacrificed. And that's all in Georgia. You know, it sounds like a movie, and those aren't even all the atrocious facts, but that's part of the horrors that you don't see behind the scenes.
It's a horrible situation that Gillooly says can have a happy ending, but it starts with someone seeking help.
It's gratifying to see that a victim that was crying and went through hell for years, when you see them 2 years later and they're smiling again, and that they're thriving, and that they want to be a voice to help others. I mean, it just grips your heart. So yeah, that's why I do it.
Gillooly adds that there are several important signs that someone could be a victim of labor trafficking to look out for. Now, that could include someone living in a home or an apartment with an unusually high number of people, like 10 or more. Another red flag is if you see someone living in conditions like that being picked up and dropped off around the same time each day. Another sign is if they're living in squalor and if someone else is controlling their documents, like a passport. This is a case that WTOC Investigates is going to continue following, so stick with us for the latest. Mike, Dawn.
All right. Thank you, Shane. If you suspect someone you know is a victim of labor trafficking, Gillooly says to contact the Human Trafficking Hotline. That number right there on your screen, 1-888-373-7888. We also will have it posted on our website, WTOC.com.
We have an update on a WTOC Investigate story.
Yeah, after our investigation, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has now opened their own investigation into the case of 13 Chinese nationals that say they were trafficked to Savannah. Now, the men reported their situation to the Savannah Police Department after they say they were promised housing, transportation, and $18 an hour to work at a warehouse. But after a month of work, they didn't receive any pay. The GBI tells WTOC that today, after our story, speaking with the men aired last night, the Savannah Police Department requested that a formal investigation be opened into that situation. Several major updates to a WTOC investigation we first brought to you in April. Allegations of labor trafficking right here in Savannah now being investigated at the federal level. Our WTOC, Shay Schrader, looking into this, and after she aired an original story, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took on the case. And here's Shay with a closer look.
That's right. And in just the past several weeks, the GBI has confirmed to me that the United States Department of Homeland Security is now investigating. We've also learned that the alleged trafficking was taking place in a warehouse on a property owned by the Savannah Economic Development Authority. We interviewed people who say that they're victims in the case, We have blurred their faces for safety reasons, and because they don't speak English, we communicated with them through a translator. The man translating the Chinese language does not wish to be identified. WTOC's own Ryan Tismaneski translated the Spanish language.
We will follow this, constantly keep in touch, whatever we need to do, because this is absolutely deplorable, assuming this is going on.
A little over a week after our first story aired, the Savannah Police Department was called back to the warehouse where more than 13 Chinese nationals say they were brought to work and never got paid. We went to the warehouse. There, we met a dozen more immigrants with similar stories.
Do they know the name of the company?
They all tell us that they were brought to the warehouse through various staffing agencies to work for a company which, according to a police report, is called eGreen Transportation. But who is eGreen Transportation? A website with that name says it's a transportation and logistics company that has roots all over the world, including in Savannah and in California, where the company's website says they're based. According to California state records, the business is officially registered as eGreen Transport Corporation to a person named Sang-Wen Chen. However, if you look up eGreen Transport Corporation in Georgia, there's no record of the company. So we started to track down the owners by finding out who owns the warehouse. In the search for that answer, we found that the warehouse is operating on a property owned by the Savannah Economic Development Authority. The warehouse itself is not owned by CETA, but Safavia, a New York-based furniture company. Records show that CETA began leasing the property to Safavia in 2016.
We just have title to the property so that we can provide the abatement.
Georgia law doesn't allow cities or counties to give ad valorem property tax exemptions to companies directly, but they can give such exemptions to development authorities like CETA. So by extension, companies leasing from development authorities can get a tax break. Trip Tollison, the CEO of CETA, says that helps bring businesses to the area.
In this case, we did a 10-year property tax abatement for Safavia, and thankfully we won the business.
We reached out to Safavia asking about their relationship with eGreen Transport Corporation. They told us they don't know anything about eGreen, but they do sublease the warehouse to a company called Mayrock Incorporated, a Virginia-based company. However, according to California state records, Mayrock Incorporated also has a business license in the state. The address on their website is the same as the one on eGreen's website, and the records show the California branch of Mayrock is operated by Chen, the same person eGreen Transport Corporation is operated by. Safavia declined to comment further.
Do you have any oversight when they begin subleasing a property?
In this case, when we do the verification, when we go through the annual process, they are to disclose and let us know what is happening with the entire square footage of the facility. Which we've done in this case, and they've told us about who they're subleasing to with a small portion of what they have. And then so far so good, or at least what we've been told, so far so good. And unfortunately now there seems to be something going on.
We also found that eGreen Transport Corporation is being sued in California court for a laundry list of alleged offenses, including fraud, receiving stolen property, unjust enrichment, negligent interference with prospective economic relations, and intentional interference of prospective economic relations. Named in the California lawsuit, along with Chen, is Monica Wang. The workers we spoke with identified her as the general manager of eGreen in Savannah.
There's a manager, a female manager. Her name is Monica. This is a female manager. There's 3 Chinese, that person that they're together, partnered together.
Monica's super rare to see her actually at the warehouse. She's never really there. Whenever she is there, if you do come up to her, she'll just kind of shoo you away. She's really only there when like disasters happen. So when the police came, she was there.
We tried to speak with her when we were at the warehouse, but no one would answer the door. We also went to some of the staffing companies employees had been recruited by, trying to get in touch.
Do you have any contact information for the folks at eGreen?
I stopped full communication with them.
Okay.
I don't have no more communication with them. I think they even left Savannah.
All in all, the alleged victims estimate that dozens of people are collectively owed hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they tell us that life has been tough after working for weeks with nothing to show for it.
In this country, if you don't work, you don't eat. So they're looking to work somewhere else right now.
The people we spoke with say they have hope that they'll see justice. After WTOC's original story aired, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation opened a case into the situation. Since then, they've confirmed to us that Homeland Security has taken over, some of the alleged victims telling us they've spoken to the agency's investigators working the case.
They ask about when they got here, what did they work, or what kind of work they performed. Also the relationship that they're asking him, the relationship between the I guess the employment agency and the workplace, and then also who's responsible, the main responsible person.
What is CETA's responsibility to make sure that things like this aren't happening in their properties?
If tenants or occupiers or the owners of that property are not doing or at least applying good business practices, we want to get to the bottom of it and make sure it doesn't exist. In this particular case, we're definitely trying to figure that out. If this practice is going on, we want to make sure it's shut down immediately. The tenant is removed, all of those things that you can think of. But I've got the confidence in the law enforcement route. If Homeland Security is really diving into this, I have the confidence they'll get to the bottom of it. But from the tenant all the way down, we're going to be very cooperative. We're going to do all that we can to make sure this is not going on.
CETA tells us that in the past several years, they've ended the practice of allowing subleases on their properties. But the sublease in this case existed before that. Safavia's tax abatement ends in December of 2026, and at that point, CETA says they'll no longer have any involvement with the property. Now, we did also reach out to Homeland Security. They told us it's their policy not to confirm or deny active investigations. WTOC will continue to follow this case, so stick with us on air and online for the latest updates. For WTOC News, I'm Shay Schrader.
Good evening and thanks for joining us for the news at 6. I'm Dawn Baker. Mike Sela has the night off. Tonight, an update into a WTOC investigation. Victims of an alleged labor trafficking situation in Savannah are now taking action at the federal level. You may remember our investigation into E-Green Transport Corporation, a warehouse in Savannah. We spoke with 13 Chinese migrants back in April. Now, they say they were brought to the United States to work at the warehouse and were never paid. We found the warehouse was operating on a property owned by the Savannah Economic Development Authority. After our first story aired, the Department of Homeland Security launched an investigation into this situation. Joining us now, investigative reporter Shay Schrader. Shay, what's the very latest update you can give us?
Yes, good evening, Dawn. A number of victims in this case have lawyered up, and they filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, alleging that the company violated federal employment law.
A charge filed on behalf of former employees of E-Green Transport Corporation and Bull Human Resources alleges that those companies violated what's known as the employees' Section 7 rights. Section 7 rights guarantee employees the right to organize and the right to strike. WTOC was present when more than a dozen E-Green employees went on strike, claiming they'd worked for weeks without being paid and wouldn't continue working until they were. The charge against the two companies alleges that they threatened to report the employees to, quote, various law enforcement agencies and to, quote, fire employees who continued to make demands for their unpaid wages. The Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund is representing the workers in the case and filed the charge on their behalf. Elizabeth Koo, a senior lawyer with the firm, released a statement that says in part, these employers not only illegally refused to pay these workers, raising serious labor concerns, but also violated their right to organize and express their grievances. Their employers must be held accountable.
We also heard from E-Green Transport Corporation shortly before we came on air tonight. E-Green saying in part that they strongly deny these claims and they're confident that the NLRB investigation will find them to be meritless. E-Green is proud of its stellar reputation as a warehouse service provider and is committed to treating all workers at its several warehouse locations across the country in full compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. We did reach out to them earlier today, again, heard back to them right before we came on air, although we haven't been able to reach anybody from Bull Human Resources. Another update to the story as well, we've confirmed that the Department of Labor's Wage and Hours Division has opened an investigation into the case. That makes 3 federal agencies that are now on top of the situation. We are going to continue to follow it here on WTOC Investigate, so stick with us for the very latest. Live in the studio tonight, Shay Schrader, WTOC News.